There's no way to sugarcoat it. This had to be the worst day of my life. Losing one tooth is bad enough, but three? That's just downright embarrassing. It all started that morning. I was running late for work, rushing around my apartment trying to find my keys, when I tripped over my dog's toy and face planted right into the corner of my coffee table. The pain hit me like a freight train, sharp and immediate. When I pulled myself up off the floor, I could feel something was off. I rushed to the mirror and, to my horror, realized 3 of my front teeth were gone. My heart sank as I stared at my reflection. How was I supposed to go to work like this? How was I supposed to show my face to anyone? With my hand trembling, I grabbed my phone and called my dentist's office. Of course, it was Friday, the one day of the week when they were fully booked. But after a lot of begging and explaining my situation, they agreed to squeeze me in for an emergency appointment later that afternoon. I was a mess by the time I arrived at the dentist's office. I hadn't eaten, barely slept, and my face was still throbbing from the fall. As I sat in the waiting room, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I hated going to the dentist. The sound of the drill, the bright lights, the sterile smell, it all made my skin crawl. And now I was about to face the ultimate nightmare, getting my teeth fixed in an emergency. Mr. Davis, the receptionist called, snapping me out of my thoughts. I stood up, my hands clammy as I followed her to the back of the office. Dr. Lane, my dentist, was already waiting for me in the examination room. He smiled as I walked in, his dark eyes warm and reassuring. "Well, this isn't exactly how we wanted to see you today, is it?" he joked, trying to lighten the mood. I forced a weak smile, but I wasn't in the mood for jokes. "Yeah, you could say that." Dr. Lane gestured for me to sit in the chair, and I did, feeling the familiar sense of dread wash over me. The lights above me were blinding, and I could hear the faint hum of dental tools in the background. "So what happened?" he asked as he pulled on his gloves. I explained the situation, feeling more embarrassed with each passing second. Dr. Lane listened patiently, nodding sympathetically as I described how I had lost my teeth. "Well, let's take a look and see what we're dealing with," he said, leaning in to examine my mouth. As he worked, I couldn't help but notice how gentle he was. His hands were steady, his touch light, and despite my anxiety, I felt a strange sense of comfort in his presence. Dr. Lane had always been kind and professional, but there was something different about him today, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. After a few minutes, he pulled back, his expression thoughtful. "Well, it's not as bad as it could be," he said, offering me a reassuring smile. "We'll need to replace the teeth, obviously, but it's a pretty straightforward procedure." I nodded, trying to take in what he was saying, but all I could think about was how ridiculous I must look sitting there with half my teeth missing. "We'll get you fixed up in no time," Dr. Lane said as he prepared the tools. "Just try to relax." Easier said than done. As he began the procedure, I did my best to keep calm, but the whole situation felt surreal. Here I was, sitting in a dentist chair with 3 missing teeth, while my ridiculously attractive dentist worked on my mouth. And yes, I'll admit it, I had always found Dr. Lane attractive. He was tall, dark hair, and an easy smile. But it wasn't just his looks. He had a way of making you feel comfortable, even when you were lying on a dentist chair. Not that it mattered, of course. He was my dentist, and I was just some clumsy guy who couldn't even keep his teeth intact. The procedure took longer than I expected, but finally, after what felt like hours, Dr. Lane leaned back, removing his gloves with a satisfied smile. "All done," he said. "You're going to need some time to heal, but everything went smoothly. You'll be back to normal before you know it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "Thanks, Dr. Lane," I muttered, my voice a little shaky. He smiled, standing up to help me out of the chair. "No problem. Just take it easy for the next few days. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to call." As I left the office, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief, embarrassment, and something else, something I didn't want to admit to myself. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Dr. Lane had looked at me, the way his touch had felt so gentle. It was ridiculous, of course. He was just doing his job, and I was just another patient. But as I walked out of the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. The next few days were rough. I stayed home from work, too embarrassed to show my face in public, and spent most of my time lying on the couch trying to distract myself with TV and ice cream. My mouth still ached from the procedure, but it wasn't just the physical pain that was bothering me. It was the memory of Dr. Lane, the way he had smiled at me, the way his hands had felt on my skin. I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind, but they kept creeping back in. A few days later, I received a call from the dentist's office, reminding me of my follow-up appointment. I had almost forgotten about it, but now the thought of seeing Dr. Lane again made my heart race. When I arrived for my follow-up, I was still a little nervous, but the receptionist greeted me with a smile, and before I knew it, I was back in the examination room, sitting in that all-too-familiar chair. Dr. Lane walked in a few minutes later, his usual warm smile on his face. "How are you feeling?" he asked as he sat down beside me. "Better," I replied, though my voice sounded a little shaky. "Still a little sore, but better." Dr. Lane nodded, pulling on his gloves. "That's normal. Let's take a look and make sure everything's healing properly." As he examined my mouth, I tried to focus on anything other than the fact that he was so close to me. His hands were gentle, just like last time, and the smell of his cologne filled the air, making it hard to concentrate. After a few minutes, he pulled back, his expression satisfied. "Everything looks good," he said, removing his gloves. "You're healing well, and the replacements are settling in nicely." I nodded, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing. "Thanks," I muttered, feeling a little awkward. Dr. Lane smiled, his eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. "You know, you're handling this a lot better than most people would," he said, his voice soft. I blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Really? I feel like I've been a total mess." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Trust me, you're doing great. Most people wouldn't have taken this as well as you have." I felt my cheeks flush, and I quickly looked away, feeling flustered. Why was he being so nice to me? "Anyway," Dr. Lane said, standing up and giving me a quick nod. "You're all set for now. Just make sure to follow the care instructions, and you'll be back to normal in no time." I stood up, grabbing my jacket, but as I turned to leave, something stopped me. I wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way he had looked at me, or the way he had been so kind, but before I knew it, I found myself turning back to face him. "Dr. Lane," I asked, my voice hesitant. He looked up, his expression curious. "Yeah." I opened my mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know why I had turned around in the first place. But then, in a moment of reckless bravery, I blurted out the last thing I ever expected to say. "Do you want to grab coffee sometime?" For a moment, the room went silent, and I was convinced I had just made a colossal mistake. Dr. Lane blinked, clearly taken aback by my sudden invitation, and for a split second, I wished the floor would open up and swallow me whole. Why had I asked him that? He was my dentist, not someone you randomly invited out for coffee. What had I been thinking? But then, to my surprise, Dr. Lane smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Coffee," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Are you asking me out?" I felt my face heat up, and I quickly shook my head, trying to backtrack. "No, I mean, I'm not like that. I just, thought maybe we could." He chuckled, cutting off my rambling, and I stopped mid-sentence, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's okay, James," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "I'd love to grab coffee with you." My eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" He nodded, still smiling. "Really? How about tomorrow afternoon? I'm off work at 3. I stared at him, my brain struggling to catch up with what was happening. This had to be a dream, right? There was no way Dr. Lane, the ridiculously attractive dentist I had secretly crushed on for years, was actually agreeing to go out with me. "Tomorrow's great," I finally managed to say, trying to sound casual even though my heart was racing. Dr. Lane grinned, slipping off his gloves and tossing them into the trash. "Great. I'll text you the details later." I nodded, still in a bit of a daze, and quickly left the office before I could make a fool of myself any further. As soon as I stepped outside, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Had that really just happened? Had I actually asked Dr. Lane out for coffee, and had he said yes? That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, my mind spinning with what-ifs and nervous excitement. What did this mean? Was it just coffee, or was it something more? Was he interested in me, or was he just being polite? The thought of spending time with him outside of the sterile confines of the dentist's office both thrilled and terrified me. The next day dragged on, my nerves building as I counted down the hours until 3 o'clock. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Dr. Lane to text and cancel, but the message never came. He was serious. He actually wanted to grab coffee with me. At exactly 2:55 p.m., I arrived at the cafe we had agreed to meet at, my heart racing as I scanned a room for him. The place was cozy and quiet, with soft jazz playing in the background and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. I was just about to sit down when the door opened, and there he was, Dr. Lane, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. He was out of his usual scrubs, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, and it struck me just how different he looked outside of work. He didn't seem like the professional, put-together dentist I had known for years. He seemed real. "Hey," he greeted me with a warm smile as he walked over to the table. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." I shook my head, trying to hide how nervous I was. "No, not at all. I just got here." We ordered our drinks, and as we sat down, I could feel the awkward tension between us. Neither of us seemed to know how to start the conversation, and for a moment, I wondered if this had been a terrible idea. What if we had nothing to talk about? What if this turned into one of those painfully awkward encounters where both parties couldn't wait to leave? But Dr. Lane was the first to break the ice. So he began, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "How's the tooth situation?" I let out a nervous laugh, grateful for the casual topic. "Better," I replied. "Still a little sore, but nothing too bad." He nodded, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'd hate to think I did all that work for nothing." The conversation started off light, about my recovery, his work as a dentist, and the usual small talk that comes with first-time outings. But as the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves easing into a more natural flow. Dr. Lane, Steve, as he told me to call him, was surprisingly easy to talk to, and before I knew it, we were laughing about all sorts of things. "So, what do you do outside of fixing people's teeth?" I asked, feeling more relaxed than I had all day. Steve chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "Well, believe it or not, I'm not just a boring dentist. I like to go hiking, spend time outdoors. I'm kind of a nature nerd." "Really?" I asked, genuinely surprised. I wouldn't have pegged you as the outdoorsy type. He grinned. "Yeah, I know. People always assume I spend my weekends reading dental journals or something." We both laughed, and for the first time, the tension between us seemed to disappear. It felt like I was talking to a friend, someone I could be myself around. And the more we talked, the more I found myself drawn to him. There was something about the way he listened, the way he smiled, that made me feel seen. By the time we finished our coffee, I had all but forgotten about the awkwardness of the past few days. Steve wasn't just my dentist. He was kind, funny, and ridiculously easy to be around. And as we stood outside the cafe, saying our goodbyes, I realized that I didn't want this to be the last time we saw each other. "I had a really good time," Steve said, his voice soft. "Me too," I replied, feeling my heart race as we stood there, just a little too close to each other. There was a pause, and for a moment, I wondered if he was going to say something else, if he was going to make a move. But instead, he gave me a small smile and stepped back. "Let's do this again sometime," he said, his eyes locking with mine. I nodded, unable to stop the smile from spreading across my face. "Yeah, I like that." Steve gave me one last nod before turning and walking away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. As I watched him disappear down the street, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. Maybe this wasn't just coffee. Maybe there was something more between us, something I hadn't expected. The days after our coffee date felt like a blur. I kept replaying our conversation over and over in my head, analyzing every little detail, wondering if I had misread the signals. Was Steve really interested in me? Or had it just been a friendly gesture? But then, a few days later, I got a text from him. "Steve, hey, I had a great time the other day. Want to grab dinner this weekend?" My heart skipped a beat as I read the message, and without thinking, I typed out a reply. "Me, I'd love to." Dinner felt like a step forward, a step towards something more. And as the weekend approached, I found myself getting more and more nervous. What if I was wrong? What if this was still just a friendly thing? Or worse, what if I completely embarrassed myself? When Saturday night rolled around, I arrived at the restaurant we had agreed on, my nerves in overdrive. Steve was already there, waiting at a table near the back, and as soon as I saw him, I felt my anxiety start to melt away. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, standing up to greet me with that same easy charm I had come to expect from him. "Hey," he said, his voice warm. "Glad you could make it." We sat down, and once again the conversation flowed easily. We talked about everything, work, hobbies, family. But there was a different energy between us this time, something more charged, more intense. I could feel it in the way Steve looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long. After dinner, we decided to take a walk. The night was cool, with a gentle breeze blowing through the trees, and as we strolled down the quiet street, the tension between us grew. We stopped by a park, standing under a street lamp as we talked about nothing in particular. But then, out of nowhere, Steve turned to me, his expression serious. "James," he said, his voice low, "there's something I've been wanting to do since that day in the office." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. The world seemed to stop the moment Steve's lips touched mine. I had thought about this moment 100 times in the past few days, but nothing could have prepared me for how it actually felt. It was soft, gentle, and yet there was something electric about it, something that sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't move at first, too shocked to process what was happening. But then slowly I kissed him back. The kiss was brief, but it left my heart pounding in my chest, my mind spinning. When Steve pulled back, he looked at me, his expression both nervous and hopeful. "Sorry," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I didn't mean to surprise you like that. I just couldn't stop thinking about it." I stared at him, still reeling from what had just happened. It wasn't that I didn't want him to kiss me. It was the opposite. I had been dreaming about this moment ever since our first coffee date, but now that it had actually happened, I wasn't sure how to feel. Steve shifted uncomfortably, clearly mistaking my silence for something else. "Look, if that was too much, No," I blurted out, cutting him off. No, it wasn't too much. I just wasn't expecting it." His shoulders relaxed, and he let out a small laugh. "Yeah, me neither." For a moment, we stood there in the quiet park, the cool night air swirling around us. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken questions that lingered in the air. What did this mean for us? Was this just a one-time thing, or was there something more here? "I've never done this before," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. With a dentist. Or anyone, really." Steve smiled, his eyes softening. "Neither have I. But I like you, James. And I don't think it's just because of your teeth." I laughed, the sound breaking through the nervous energy that had been building between us. Steve stepped closer, his gaze locked on mine. "So what now?" he asked, his voice low. "Let's kiss again." We started seeing each other more often, grabbing dinner after work, going for walks, and yes, sharing more than a few kisses along the way. It felt strange, in a way, surreal almost. This was Steve, my dentist, the guy I had seen for years in a completely different light. And now here we were. But as strange as it also felt right. Steve was kind, thoughtful, and funny in ways I hadn't expected. He made me laugh, made me feel comfortable in my own skin. And more than that, he made me feel like I mattered. We didn't rush things. We took our time, getting to know each other in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't just about the attraction, though I'll admit that was definitely there. It was about the connection, the understanding that had grown between us. I had always been a little awkward when it came to relationships. I wasn't the kind of guy who went on a lot of dates or knew how to flirt effortlessly. But with Steve, I didn't have to pretend to be anyone else. I could just be me, and that was enough. A few weeks after that kiss in the park, we found ourselves back at that same cafe, sitting at our usual table, sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm, golden light through the windows, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment settle over me. Steve looked at me, his eyes twinkling with amusement. I never thought I'd end up dating one of my patients," he said, his tone teasing. I grinned, leaning back in my chair. "Well, technically, we started seeing each other after I lost those 3 teeth. So really, it's your fault." He laughed, shaking his head. "Fair enough. But seriously, James, I'm glad this happened. I felt my heart flutter at his words, and I smiled, nodding. Me too. There was a brief pause, and then Steve reached across the table, taking my hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding, and I felt that familiar spark of connection between us. I know this probably wasn't what you expected when you walked into my office that day, he said softly, but I'm really glad we're here. I squeezed his hand, my smile widening. I am too. One night, as we sat on his couch, curled up together watching a movie, Steve turned to me, his expression serious. James, he began, his voice soft. I've been thinking. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked at him, my nerves kicking in. What about? He hesitated for a moment, then smiled. I don't want to rush you or anything, but I think I'm falling for you. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. It was the first time either of us had said anything like that, and the weight of his words hung in the air between us. But then, as I looked into his eyes, I realized that I felt the same way. I had been feeling it for a while, but I had been too scared to admit it, to him or to myself. I think I'm falling for you too, I whispered, my voice shaking with emotion. Steve's face lit up with a smile, and before I knew it, he was kissing me again, soft and slow, like he was savoring every second. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my skin. I'm glad we found each other, he murmured, his voice filled with affection. Me too, I replied, my heart swelling with happiness. We still had our awkward moments. Navigating the whole dating your dentist thing wasn't exactly a walk in the park, but we were getting better at this. We laughed, we talked, and we supported each other in ways that made me realize just how special this was. Steve wasn't just my dentist anymore. He was my partner, my friend, my confidant. And even though it had all started with one of the most embarrassing days of my life, I couldn't help but be grateful for the way things had turned out.